So guys, we're here with another time of the year, and this time of the year we're going to be talking about the Nintendo Switch, which is coming up. The Nintendo Switch is Nintendo's newest exploration into the console slash handheld market. You see, Nintendo, let's go back in history a little bit. Nintendo is the very first of the major the home game systems that most of us are familiar with. There were systems before that, of course, like the Atari, ColecoVision, and Television, Odyssey, and Vectrex, and all that, but most people's first foray was a Nintendo, and they really got a strong hold in the market way back in the day. Nintendo's always kind of been the leader, and in recent generations, we have been watching Nintendo slip further and further. Myself, I actually welcome Nintendo slipping from the top because the faster they slip, the more likely we are to get their games onto the console. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. We're going to talk about the Switch and the history of Nintendo's underpowered systems and how it really kind of matters. See, the new Switch, they're talking about it's only going to have 1 teraflop of power, and the teraflop of power, everyone says, well, who cares about what a teraflop is? Well, to give you an idea, the Xbox One started off as 1.33 teraflops, and Nintendo's newest foray into next generation isn't even going to match the last generation's starting point. And everyone's saying, well, Nintendo's got a bunch of third-party support coming. The third-party support, a lot of developers have already promised third-party support, but this isn't the first time we've seen this. If you go back to the history of the Wii U and the Wii, there was promise of third-party support back then. There was promise of third-party support on the Nintendo 64 also. And as time went on, we found that the limitations of these systems caused a lot of developers to jump ship and move over to other systems. The first time this really affected me, we're going to go back in time to the Nintendo 64. I had the Nintendo, and I had the Super Nintendo. And I was one of those fanboys in the beginning that refused to admit that Nintendo did anything wrong. Even way back in the old days, when Nintendo versus Sega, it seemed like Sega's Sonic flew by at a much faster pace, and its graphics could be even a little bit faster. And back then, I would still tell myself the Nintendo's superior, and whether that was the truth or not remains to be seen. But then we go on to the the Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis. Now, the Sega Genesis could put out 32 bits of graphics, and Nintendo could only put out the 16 bits of graphics. But for some reason back then, I was such a Nintendo fanboy that I would still insist it was better. And then came the Nintendo 64. And while the Nintendo 64 did have a little bit more processing power than the PlayStation, what it did not have was it didn't have the ability to have games that were large enough. Now, I'll give you an idea about it. PlayStation ran the CD, and Nintendo 64 ran the cartridges. And Nintendo 64's cartridges can only hold around 80 megabytes to 90 megabytes total, where an average disc can hold 700, 800, 900 megabytes. And on top of that, games can use multiple discs, so you can have gigabytes of data versus Nintendo's 80, 90, 100 megabytes of data. Now, if you were a developer to make a game, would you want to make a game that was limited down to the slowest or the fastest? So this kind of stuff matters, and where it came to a head was on the Nintendo 64. I used to play Final Fantasy 1 on the Nintendo. And then I used to play Final Fantasy 3, which is actually Final Fantasy 6, on the Super Nintendo, and I used to love it. I loved it, I loved it, I loved it. And then when Final Fantasy was supposed to come to the Nintendo 64, I was so excited, and then they announced they weren't. And this was the first time I felt developers abandon consoles based on hardware alone. The next Final Fantasy to come out was Final Fantasy 7. And it had 3 discs, and it was a total of 2.4 gigabytes of memory, if I remember right, and it was able to do actual recorded audio, and it was able to do actual full motion video, and it was able to do all kinds of stuff that Nintendo 64 wasn't able to do. Now, the Nintendo 64 had more bits. It had 64 bits of processing power, where the PlayStation 1 was a 32-bit with the doubler on it. It still isn't the same thing, and you can have all the processing power you want, but everything needs to be in line. Marketing, processing power, game quality, hardware specs, so third-party developers don't leave. And right now, I'm watching Nintendo Switch enter the arena of the next generation with an underpowered system that is literally almost 2 generations back. Because right now, we have the Xbox One, and we have the Xbox One S. And by the time the Switch comes out, the S is already going to be kind of old, and the Switch isn't even pulling the power that the original Xbox One was. And I'm seeing Nintendo go down this path that they've gone down before, where they like to pretend everything's fine, they like to pretend everything's good, and Nintendo fanboys make excuses for them. And in the end of the day, they end up wondering, why don't we have Halo? Why don't we have Metal Gear? Why don't we have Final Fantasy? Why don't we have Grand Theft Auto? Why don't we have any of the more violent games, any of the bigger games, any of the adult titles, any of the games that have real processing power or larger games. And the new Nintendo is making the exact same problem they've always made in the past. And they always cover the tracks by saying, well, we're not competing with Sony, we're not competing with PlayStation, we're not competing with Xbox. And they've said that before, which is just a load of shit. It's a load of shit, because at the end of the day, when your mom, if you have a mom, goes out and buys your video game system for you, she's not going into the store thinking, well, Nintendo technically isn't in this fight. She's going in and thinking, which one of these systems, if I buy my kid, will he like the most, that he can use the longest? And if I was to look at Nintendo's marketing, it's like, ooh, the Wii U came out, what, 3 years ago, 2 years ago? The Wii came out, what, 3 years before that? And this entire time, the Xbox One's been running and the PlayStation 4 has been running. They're already ending the Wii U's generation, starting up with the Switch again. It's like, oh, this is an awful sign. It's an awful sign. I would not, if I was a parent out there and I was considering buying a system for my kid, I would probably go with a PC right now. I'd go with the used Xbox One. I would not go with the brand new Nintendo Switch. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. When you look at Nintendo Wii U, and while it had good processing power, when it was time to uncouple it, its tablet didn't have multi-pressure sensitivity. It did not. It was blurry. It was low res. Everyone has a tablet at home that can already play games and emulators as it is. So why would I get that? Why would I pay for that? And when I look at the new Switch and I think about Nintendo's history of kind of fudging certain things, and I look at the specs that are coming out, and this seems like this is going to be Nintendo's last hurrah, because they're hoping to get that money, that same Wii money, that gimmick money. When the Wii came out, everybody's grandmother bought it. They all loved it. They played it 2 times. They set it down and forgot about it. And Nintendo's kind of hoping for that again, and it's not going to happen this time. And here's why. The mobile market is done. It's done. Everyone says, well, the 3DS does good sales. Well, yeah, it does good sales because it came out before cell phone gaming became popular. Cell phone gaming has completely eroded the concept of a need of a handheld portable game. If my kid came and says, I want a new Nintendo whatever, I would say, why don't you just use your phone? There's the Google Play Store. I know a lot of kids, including myself, know how to put emulators on their phones. I can play an Xbox on my phone. I can play a PlayStation on my phone. I can play a Nintendo on my phone. So why would I limit myself to a thing that is limited? I can't call, I can't browse, and I can't load up other emulators on it. Why would I do that? I really feel that this is going to be Nintendo's last hurrah. It's going to be Nintendo's last console. I know there's going to be a lot of Nintendo fanboys out there inside my comment section making arguments. Oh, but what about their games? Or what about this sale? What about this? What about that? You know what? I'm not buying it anymore. Nintendo undersells every single time. Nintendo loses more and more of the market share every single time. They got lucky with the Wii because it was a gimmick. But you show me one gamer amongst all of you, that pick up your Wii still. Nobody does. And if you do, you're playing it with your grandma to play tennis. Nobody plays that anymore. And that was Nintendo's last hurrah. The Wii U, it never sold quite right. It's ending its life cycle early. It ended the Wii's life cycle early by coming out. And if I was a mother, I'd be looking at this pattern, and I'd be remembering the Sega. I'd be remembering when Sega came out with Sega, the Sega Genesis, the 32-bit expander, the CD reader, and then the Saturn and the Dreamcast, all within the course of about 4 years. If I was a mother, I'd say no more. And that's why Sega stopped making consoles, and that's why you can see Sega games on other systems now. And I feel this is going to be Nintendo's last hurrah on this. Last time Nintendo's going to do this to us. They're going to try to make a cash grab by having a unique, gimmicky handheld thing that's going to couple at home and couple with the carryout. But it's not going to do it this time, guys. I swear. I know Nintendo's saying all these third-party developers are lining up. They said the same thing about the Wii U. And you know what? They all took off as soon as they found it was underpowered. They make these claims in the beginning, and they never pan out. Squaresoft used to be signed on with the N64, and all Final Fantasy games ended up on the PlayStation. This pattern has happened before. It's happening again. I'm an old gamer, and I've seen it, and it's going down a road that I know where it's going. The days of handheld gaming are over. The days of a console charging you $200 or $300 for a handheld game are over. I went to Walmart. I bought a $50 little Samsung freaking phone, just their basic phone. And on that, I have a PlayStation 2 emulator, I have an Xbox emulator, I have a Super Nintendo emulator, and I play any game I want. I'm not limited to low-res graphics. I'm not limited to simple little baby games. Their ability to have a monopoly on this is over. That's why the Vita didn't really take off. The Vita is a good canary in the coal mine for what I'm talking about. The 3DS and the 3D and the Nintendo Game Boy, they're all the same thing. It's the Nintendo Game Boy that's slowly been mutated over the years. That's why it has an audience, because the audience goes from one to the next. The Vita came in right during was it the PlayStation 2 era, and the Vita tried its best to really grab the market. Didn't quite grab as much market because at that point, mobile gaming was dying, cell phone gaming was starting. Vita never got that foothold, and it's only going to get less and less. And the same thing with the 3DS, less and less. And now the Switch is going to come out, it's going to kill the purpose for the 3DS. So watch those 3DS sales plummet fast. And then on top of it, it's not going to fully replace it, because why would your parent buy it when it's going to be underpowered and severely limited? Nintendo, I'm sorry to see you go. You really did help revitalize the market, but in 2 years' time, you guys, mark my words, Nintendo's just going to be making video games for the Xbox and the PlayStation and PC. Anyways, guys, this is Bang Creepy. It's my thoughts on Nintendo Switch. I hope you agree. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. Please hit that like, hit that dislike if you disagree, and I'll see you all real soon.